We've studied this book several times in the years I've been at this church in different ways. Tonight, I'm interested in the last part of the book. You remember in the James study that Mike Bross has been doing, remember the latter end of Job? Remember that? So it gave me a thought for our messages while I'm thinking about the book of James still. So turn with me to Job 38. And our attention will be, my intention is to give two messages on this. And at the last chapters of Job, we've heard what Job has said in this book. We've heard what his three counselors have said. We've heard what Elihu said. It's been quite a journey when you go through this book to work through all of that. And for many people, they start reading Job and they just kind of throw up their hands and say, I don't know what's going on in this book. I can't follow what's going on. But it is a book worthy of your attention and time and interest. And finally, God shows up. And God speaks. And God speaks twice to Job. First time and the second time are in these last chapters, in this epilogue. And here we've come to the most significant part of the book. I'm just skipping the rest of it because we've already studied here many times. But I just want to emphasize the last part of it as James does. There is no doubt in my mind it's worth the trip to study through the book of Job and take a lot of time teaching it, studying it, and so forth. So I hope that we will always do that till the Lord comes. So, Father, help me to speak and each of us to hear, we pray. Amen. Most of us, I think, enjoy watching animals or watching the stars. For 50 years, I've been going up to New Philadelphia, where my parents lived and where I ministered, and on various trips. And I remember somewhere, many of those times by myself, and I remember driving along 77 and watching the green hills beside me on both sides, and seeing some of them that were empty of any animals, and then seeing others that were covered with horses or lambs or goats, cattle. And as I made those trips so many times, I began to reflect on that, and I thought, I love Ohio and the hills and the greenery and so forth, but it's extra special when there's some animals walking around on those hills. It's like they're meant to be. There's something special. It's like you feel it's empty without the animals. What an empty world it would be if we didn't have different kinds of animals to enjoy. And some of my best vacations have not been in big cities, but in places where we can enjoy the creatures God has made. And I'm sure many of you have taken trips to different zoos, different places. If you're going to be married to Linda, you're going to end up going to zoos. You're going to end up seeing critters. Or sometimes possibly going to the Smoky Mountains and driving through there and enjoying that, or Yellowstone National Park, or Rocky Mountain National Park, things like that. John and I had a great privilege of going to Kruger National Park with Mike Brunk. Mike Brunk, I'm not sure he goes anywhere else on vacation. He's always over there whenever he gets some time off. Mike and Maria over there, and I can certainly understand why. Now, when we come to this particular chapter of Job, it's an interesting confrontation. Job's been talking a lot. His friends have been talking a lot. And then Elihu kicks in with his observations. Job's done better than his friends, but he is not done perfectly by any case. And you know the story. And if you read the book, you know what Job has said. And you have some idea of what the counselors have said. And it's a little hard dealing with what they've said, because some of the things they said are right and some of them are wrong. And some of the things they say are right, but they're said to the wrong person. It's just quite a complex thing and a little bit of an ordeal. But now God speaks, and he speaks to Job. And he's got some things to say to Job. And we have come in this book right now to the most significant part of the book, because the most important thing is not what man says about God, but what God says about man. And man's speculations and contemplations is not as important as God's revelation. And for some time, God has not spoken, but now God shows up. And when we read what God says in chapter 38 and 39, to a superficial reader, it's a letdown. God doesn't answer any of Job's questions. Job had a boatload of questions that he imagined that he could ask God. God doesn't answer Job's questions. The book doesn't end with God answering Job's questions. And God doesn't even tell Job about Satan at this point. God doesn't bring Satan in. Somewhere Job learned about it, but not in what's recorded here. So it's a bit of a surprise ending, isn't it? And a superficial reader of the book of Job, or an initial reader of the book of Job, when they read through this, they're a bit disappointed. They expected a little different resolution. And you got to sit and think and ponder and meditate through what God's saying here, or you may be disappointed. And if you're disappointed, it's because you just haven't got to the place that you understand why the book of Job was written. But nevertheless, it is. And so may the Lord help us tonight to do that. Now, as we go down through 38 and 39, God begins to interrogate Job. And he mentions creation. He mentions all these things. And God begins to ask questions to Job. And the surprise is God answers Job's questions with a deluge of counter questions. And this isn't what Job anticipated. And God's replies to Job's questions that have tormented him and his friends, that they failed to answer, someone said they do not seem to have, God's statements here do not seem to have anything to do with the central issue of why Job suffered so severely when he's done everything humanly possible to maintain a good relationship with God. You look at this and you think, what? How does this fit? That's what God does. And God gives invitations and suggestions about discoveries that Job's going to make as God answers him, but that Job can't answer. But it's not designed to humiliate him. It's not like a first grade teacher asking someone to solve a problem in algebra. God's not trying to humiliate Job. Job has actually made great advances in his knowledge of himself and of God through this particular situation. And the surprising thing is Job is not asked what he's not asked to do. He's not asked to disown his claim to be in the right. God never asked him to disown that in this particular situation. All Job needs to know is that everything is still right between him and God. And that's what he's going to find out. And knowing that, his questions that seem so important to him, he's able to leave unanswered. Sometimes we think, oh, if God answered this question, then I could rest. My mind could rest. If only God would let me know the answer to this difficult question. And this is what someone said, Job is brought to contentment without ever knowing all the facts of his own case. Think about that. And Job doesn't say, now I see it all. He never saw it all in this life. And no one ever sees it all. We won't even see it all in heaven. In all eternity, God's going to teach us about his grace, but we're never going to get done learning. So we are never going to have all our questions answered and all our perplexities solved. We're going to be learning forever. And there'll be depths of understanding and knowledge that will increase as we go through eternity. In the ages to come, he's going to show forth his riches of his grace, which means it's not going to end. God's going to say, 5 billion years, you've been in school long enough, you learned enough of what I was doing. Now we can stop. John Hartley said, God addresses Job like a teacher instructing a student who's failed to understand an important matter. Now, a good teacher's not going to call you names, you dummy, you stupid head, whatever they might call you. They're not going to do that. That's not an encouragement. They're just going to confront you with what you don't know and take you on to what you do know. Roy Zuck said of this section, in content as well as timing, it was unlike what Job expected. It was unlike what God shows up. Job didn't expect that. And then when God started talking, Job didn't expect that. Job didn't expect what God was going to say. And Zuck said, nothing was said about Job's suffering. No discussion was included about the theology of evil, nor was even any extensive answer given to the brash charges the patriarch had made about the sovereign's injustices. None of that. Instead of answering questions, God asked questions. There's 70 unanswerable questions in these chapters that God asked Job. Job couldn't answer any of them. We still cannot answer a vast majority of them. The greatest scientist, the greatest mind today, thousands of years later, could not pass this exam. There's a couple of these that we've got some approximate answers to that Job didn't even have the slightest answer to, but that doesn't mean we could even get a C or a D- on this exam. And the questions that God brings here shows Job and they show us how limited our knowledge really is. And God needs to do that to us. And it reminds Job and reminds us that our God is the Lord of the natural order. And as he's the Lord of the natural order of the universe, he's also the only one who has the capacity, ability, and authority to be the Lord of the moral order. If we can't even answer the questions that need to be answered about the natural order around us, what makes us think that we're ready to answer the theological and moral questions about the way things are, have been, or will be? And the whole point is God knows what he's doing in his universe. He is God. And none of us could sit in his chair and do a better job. We are not qualified. We're not qualified intellectually. We're not qualified experientially. We are not qualified morally. We're not qualified in any fashion, even close to qualified. We are finite. He is infinite. And may God help us to just grasp that. There was a pastor's conference that Chuck Swindoll, the famous pastor, was preaching at and hosting, and 1,500 pastors came to that concert. And they put a banner up at the conference. Pastors, the conference of pastors. And the banner said, "Relax, everybody. For once, you're not in charge." We all get we tend to get a God complex if we're pastors and think we're in charge. We're not in charge. We're never in charge, really. God's in charge. And that banner says it all. And Job is learning, relax, Job. You're not in charge. You're trying to tell me how I ought to act with you and with others. You are not in charge. This is not in your job description. You're not in charge, Job. You're not in charge, Bill Hickson. You're not in charge. I am. God says to you and me, he says it very clear, you're not in charge. Relax. You're not in charge. I'm in charge, and I'm fully qualified. Now, as we come through this, there's these series of what we might call scientific questions about the wonders and mysteries of our planet and our universe. This is Science 101, poetically presented about the inanimate creation. And then he moves to the animate creation. He deals with the structure of the world and the maintenance of the universe, and then he deals with the critters. And it's very fascinating what he says. And Job has been criticizing God's management of the universe, basically. Semi-reverently, but he's been doing it. And so God gives Job a list of questions that are impossible for him to answer, totally beyond his capacity and ability. And Job had to say to every one of them, I can't explain that. I can't oversee that. I don't know that. And Job didn't know the answers to these questions 4,000 years ago. We don't know the answer of most of them today. And even the answers we know are not a complete answer. So let's get started and think about it. It's just going to take a little bit of a reading because this is extensive, 70 questions. The Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now your loins like a man. I'll demand of you and answer me." Okay, Job, time for an exam. Now, if we think we're getting pretty smart and we know something, a final exam by the teacher that's over our head will certainly put us in our place, right? And God says, question number one, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Crickets. Job's got nothing to say to that. Declare if you have understanding. Who hath laid the measures of it, if you know? Who stretched a line upon it? Whereupon are its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy? The angels were there, Job, but you weren't. The angels know what you don't know. And you're going to call me to account? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it broke forth as if it issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud its garment and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and broke up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shalt thou come and no farther, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. It's kind of fascinating that the water doesn't just keep coming, right? Somehow God made the earth so that would be so. Modern atheistic people are all worried about climate change. I'm not worried about climate change. God controls the climate. Climate's going to change. Climate changes. And sometimes it's going to change a lot in the tribulation. I'd say there's a time of great climate change. But we don't worry about that. We're stewards of what we have, but we got to know our place. In verse 12, hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned like clay to seal, and they stand like a garment, and from the wicked their light is withheld, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, and hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Job, how deep is the ocean? Have you been there? Well, someone's measured it today. The greatest depth of the Pacific Ocean is 6.78 miles. 35,000, I can't write the figure. I can't read my writing there. So, have you been down there? Or how about the diameter of the earth? Or how about this? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? You've been down to Sheol? You know about the dead and where they are? Have the gates of death been revealed to thee? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? I wrote in my Bible years ago, does that mean Sheol is under the ocean? Seems like a good place for it. I don't know where it is. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? There's the circumference of our planet. Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? And I've lost my place. 18, yeah. Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if you know it all. I've been thinking about that verse. They advertise a cruise that goes around the world. $50,000 per person. Sign up tomorrow. Now, suppose you take that cruise and you go around the earth. Well, I guess you've been around the world. But have you seen all of the world? Have you been around one part of it? How many times would you have to go around the world to see all the world? You can't live that long. You don't have that much money or that much time. We don't even know our own planet. This planet is our house. We don't even know our own house, let alone all the other planets and the stars. We're going to tell God who made the universe. We're going to question him. We're going to start to judge him. And we've only explored part of this little world we've in. Most of the oceans we still don't know about, a lot of it. I don't even know everything about Ohio. I've lived in Athens most of my life. There's places here I've never been. Case Van Whale and I were hiking up on the ridges, and we've got lost. And I thought, I've been here all my life, and I don't even know this place. And every once in a while, we'd come up over a hill, and it was autumn, and we could see an OU building that I recognized. And so I knew approximately where I was. So we just kept working on it. Finally, we found the place. We got down where we could understand where we were. But we don't even know Athens County. So may God help us to be humble, right? God knows everything, everywhere, everyone, every ant that crawls, every person that lives. And so God's just trying to put Job in his place a bit, and us who read this. And he says in verse 19, where is the way where light dwells? And as for darkness, where's its place? That you should take it to its domain, and that you should know the path to its house. Knowest thou it because you were born, or because the number of your days is great? Hast you entered into the treasuries of the snow? You don't even know about snow. Or have you seen the treasuries of hail? Treasuries means where all this is stored, and where I've got it for when I want to use it, which I've reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war. By what way is light parted, which has scattered the east wind on the earth? Who divided the watercourse over the overflowing waters, or a way for lightning to thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness where there's no man? What about all the places on the earth that are uninhabited? I'm doing stuff there. There's things going on there that nobody knows about but me. To satisfy the desolate and waste ground, to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. Hath the rain a father, who has begotten the drops of dew, out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of heaven has gendered it. The waters are hidden as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Now, that's this planet. But now he goes into the universe. Now that he's told us how ignorant we are of our own place, he moves to the galaxies. And he said, can you bind the sweet influences Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? No. Not even with Sputnik and all the rest of the satellites after it, and all the exploration with the cameras and the radio transmissions back. Could you bring forth the Mazaroth in its season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Can you set its dominion in the earth? Can you lift up thy voice to the clouds, and the abundance of waters cover you? Can you send lightnings that they may go forth and say, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or who's given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can pour out the waterskins of heaven? When the dust grows into hardness and the clouds cleave fast together, wilt thou hunt the prey of the lion, or fill the appetite of the young lions? I'm feeding everybody on this planet, including the animals. Do you know anything about that? Can you even comprehend what I'm doing, or the scale? When they crouch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait, who provides for the raven his prey? When his young ones cry to God, they wander for lack of food. Now, what's he done? He's moved. He's moving through here from the ocean and everything that's in it. He moves to the earth. He moves to the heavens. He moves to outer space and the universe. And now we get a trip. where God mentions 20 different creatures he controls that we don't. This is suggestive, it's not exhaustive. And the point of everything in these chapters is accept your limitations, know your place. Even Clint Eastwood says a man's got to know his limitation. But have we learned that most basic lesson of life? So now let's start reading here in this next section of the book of Job. This is the trip to the zoo, but not really the zoo. It's just a trip around the world looking at different creatures and say, I know about these, I made them, I know how they work, I know what they're doing and when they're doing it, and you don't know any of this. Know you the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth, or can you mark the winds, the hinds, when the hinds do calve? Can you number the months that they fulfill, or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young ones, they cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are become strong, they grow up in the open field, they go forth and return not to them. You know any of that stuff, these wild animals having babies out in the field? I know about everything that's going on out there. Who has sent the wild ass free? Or who has loosed the bounds of the wild ass? Whose house I've made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwellings. He scorns the multitude of city, and neither regards he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture. He searches after every green thing. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you and bide by your crib? Can you bind the wild ox? I know there's different readings of this. With its band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave thy labor in vain? Wilt thou believe him that he'll bring home your seed and gather it into the barn? Gavest thou the goodly wings to your peacocks and the wings of feathers to the ostrich? Which leaves its eggs in the earth and warms them in the dust and forgets that the foot may crush them and the wild beast may break them. Now we're down to ostrich mothers who forget their young. They lay the eggs and take off. She's hardened against her young ones as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear, because God's deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. When she lifts up herself on high, she scorns the horse and his riders. Do you know that bizarre bird is 300 pounds and about 7 or 8 feet tall, can run 40 miles an hour? You're not going to win a race with an ostrich. And it's kind of odd because they just have their eggs and leave them. Somehow God takes care of it. Verse 17, because God's deprived her of wisdom. Neither hath he imparted to her understanding. When she lifts up herself on high, she scorns the horse and his rider. Hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Now we're to horses. Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He palls in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He goes on to meet the armed men. He mocks at fear and is not dismayed, neither turns he back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and sword. He swalloweth the ground with fierceness and rage. It means he's running fast. Neither believeth he that it's the sound of the trumpet. He says among the trumpets, ha ha, and he smells the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. That's an awesome thought. I remember we were out west, and we decided to take a shortcut, and we ended up in southern Wyoming, right on the corner of western Wyoming. And we stopped for lunch, and we went to a little museum there about dinosaurs. But one of the things we saw was something that I was totally surprised about. You've heard of the wild horses out west. Well, they actually gather a bunch of them up every year. And they had all these horses. There's probably 200 of them, and they were selling them off. And so there's all these horses out there living by themselves, And we sat there and watched it. It was just beautiful as they were in a pen getting ready to be sold off to different people. And to think of those animals taking care of themselves. And then they're in that place. It was rather an awesome sight, really. So Job has been a trip and selectively mentioned to all these things, and then he goes to the birds. 26, does the hawk fly by thy wisdom and stretch forth wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make her nest on high? No, you don't do that. I'm sure Case could confirm this, but we saw eagles' nests in Alaska that were massive. And these are nests made from sticks and stuff. But I mean, they would be, ones I saw would be from me to Jim and Ramona in diameter. How do they do that? And so we saw some that big. Does the eagle mount up on thy command and make her nest on high? She dwells and abides on the rock, the crag of the rock, in the strong place. From thence she seeks the prey, and her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. God's got purposes for the critters that take care of themselves. And so, fascinating business. Now, there's been some big discussions here, and there's been a lot of animosity against Job, and Job's had perplexity with God. And Job has spoken a lot of things in self-pity and some in self-assertion. And the friends are accusing him of all kinds of stuff. And God comes in and shows up, and he just gives Job this lesson about God and the world and the animals and the oceans and all the rest of it. One observation: there are no more long speeches by Job. No more of that. There are no more long speeches by Job. Job is satisfied. He is shocked into silence and satisfaction. Notice what it says in 40. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contends with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproves God, let him answer it. Summary question. Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I'm vile. What shall I answer thee? I'll lay my hand upon my mouth. Lord, I've been talking too much. I don't know my place. Once have I spoken, but I'll not answer. Yea, twice, and I'll proceed no further. The Lord answered, and then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind and said, gird up your loins like a man, and I'll demand thee, and I'll declare to you. We're not over yet, Job. We're going to apply the lesson. Will you annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like him? Deck yourself now with majesty and excellency. Array yourself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of your wrath, and behold everyone that's proud and abased. Look on everyone that's proud, bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in secret. Sit in my throne. Do my job. Run the universe for a while. Then I'll confess to thee that your own hand can save thee. But of course, that's never going to happen. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eats grass as an ox. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force in his muscles. There's a lot of things going on here. Now, some people think Behemoth is the hippo and Leviathan is the crocodile. I tend to think that Behemoth is a Brontosaurus and Leviathan's a dragon, but I'm not going to debate on that one. These are not easy things to know. And like Jonah, Job needs a double correction. Jonah's actions were corrected, and then his attitude behind his actions are corrected. In other words, God's just bring him in his place. If you look at Behemoth, whether he's a hippo or a Brontosaurus, whoever made that is greater than we are. And not just in power. A lot of engineering in that creature. It's beyond our capacity and ability. So he says in verse 16, his strength is in his loins, his force is in his muscles, his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. That kind of takes out the hippo. I've seen hippos. None of them have a tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are strong pieces of bronze. His bones are like bars of iron. He's the chief of the ways of God. He who made him can make his sword to approach to him. God can take care of critters like that. We can. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lies under the shady trees and covert reeds and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadows. The willows of the brook compass him about. He drinks up a river and hastens not. He trusts that he can draw up the Jordan in his mouth. He takes it with his eyes, and his nose pierces through the snares. That's just one. And then he goes on to Leviathan, which again, many think's a crocodile. I believe it's a dragon. Let's read this and we'll be done. Can you draw the Leviathan out with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which you let down? Can you put a hook on his nose or bore his jaw through with a thorn? I don't want to get that close to something like that. I don't even want to get that close to a crocodile, let alone to a dragon. Forgive me for telling the stories most of you know, but we were in the Everglades with Terry Thompson and some other pastors and board members. We finally got on a side trip. Rarely did that. We were on one of those airboats with the big fans in the back going through the Everglades. It was a tour thing. And we saw all these alligators in their real environment. I mean, they're out there doing their alligator thing. Some of them were quite big. And the fear of it is, you know that these guys run the same, you're going through the grass in the Everglades, and they know there's not a stump there because they probably drive it every day. But they're flying through there, and you're just thinking, I sure hope there hasn't one. I don't want to have this thing crash and end up in the water. But he stopped the boat, and an alligator came up. It wasn't a big one, but it was bigger than I wanted to get that close to. And he pulled it in the boat. Now, Terry Thompson has hunted deer, and he hunts deer and elk, and he hunts bear. But even Terry went, he took it. Terry thought, whoa, and I was behind him, so I was kind of glad I was behind him instead of ahead of him. And that guy knew what he was doing, I guess, but he petted that thing on the nose and then kissed it. That wasn't in a zoo. There was nothing like that. This thing's out in the wild. And I had several thoughts going through my mind, but I thought, that can't be smart. And so Surely you've got something better to kiss than an alligator. And so, but anyway, this thing is obviously very intimidating. And if it's a dragon, it's even more so. And so it says in verse 5, well, I'm going to go back to 41, 2. Can you put a hook in his nose or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make supplications to you? Will he speak soft words to you? Will you make a covenant will he make a covenant with thee? Will thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or will you bind him for your maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, and his head with fish spears? This is no alligator. This is no crocodile. This is something more. I think it's a dragon myself. Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. Do it no more. You only get one time to do that. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? Whatever this is, you see it and you're scared. You see it and you're scared. None is so fierce that dare stir him up, or who's able to stand before me. If you can't stand before one of my creatures, what are you going to do when you stand before me? Verse 10 is quite important. Who's given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely portion. Who can undercover the face of his garment, or who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible, round about, his scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They're joined one to another, they stick together, they cannot be sundered. By his sneezing, a light does shine. Sounds like a dragon to me. And his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils go smoke, as out of a boiling pot or cauldron. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. In his neck remains strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. His heart is firm as a stone, yea, as hard as a piece of the lower millstone. When he raises up himself, the mighty are afraid. By reason of consternation, they purify themselves. The sword of him that lays at him cannot hold, the spear, dart, or the javelin. He esteems iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laughs at the shaking of a spear. What are we looking at? Whatever it was a creature that was above man's ability to deal with. You ever wonder why God made some of those things? Creatures so scary, so dangerous, so powerful that man can't deal with it. So they'd have some idea of God's power and God's greatness. Because somehow we think we're the big deal down here. We're made in the image of God. We're to take dominion over the creatures, but in a fallen world, we can't do that. In a fallen world, there's creatures that are beyond our ability to do that. And so it says, sharp stones, verse 30, are under him. He spreads sharp pointed things upon the mire. He makes the deep to boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He makes a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be his hoary. Upon earth, there's none his like. who is made without fear. He beholds all high things. He's king over all the children of pride. Whoa. Now, what's Job's response to this? He needed a double correction. He needed a correction like Jonah. Jonah needed his action corrected, and then he needed his attitude corrected. And Job needs a double correction, his actions and his attitude. And so one writer said, in Israelite society, the judge who gave the verdict was obliged to see that justice was done. The adjudicator has passed sentence as vindicator. He secured the right of the injured party. And so God has a righteous rule, and he can administer punishment and righteousness. And God's attributes are righteous, and God is holy. Until man can wield the power, that God wields, and determine its right use, we have no reason to question God or argue with God about what he's doing. This is a humbling verse, humbling section. Go back to 40, verse 14. Then I'll also confess to you, your own hand can save you. It's impossible for man to individually deal with Behemoth or Leviathan. They are too much for man, but not too much for God. God has them under his government as well as us. The great fish that swallowed Jonah or the birds that fed Elijah, God controls them all. Therefore, Job's suffering and your suffering is not outside of God's government. And Satan is a great mental and spiritual behemoth and mighty Leviathan, but he also is under God's control, and the book of Job teaches us that. And I think Job learned that. We are not righteous enough or strong enough for God's job. Our lack of strength reminds us also of our lack of righteousness. We're not strong enough physically, mentally, or spiritually. Even though we're made in the image of God, it's a broken image. And we're not only creatures, we're fallen creatures. And fallen man can't handle the hippo, the crocodile, or certainly not the dragon or the Brontosaurus. Because of the fall of man, there's animals that are fierce and are beyond our control, even though that's our destiny to have them under us. But just because they're beyond our control doesn't mean they're not beyond God's control. What is impossible for God for man is not impossible with God. Not even God can create something greater than himself. And if we can't deal with animals God has created in a fallen world, then we need to know our place. We are above the animals, but we're not above the one who made us and the animal. And what is beyond us is not beyond God. Just because we can't doesn't mean he can't. And that's true for all the issues of life. Because I can't understand doesn't mean God can't understand. And just because God doesn't give us an answer that we're looking for doesn't mean there isn't an answer. Have you ever, as a child, asked your parents, well, why do I have to do that? And the parent says, because I tell you. I'm the parent. I'm in charge. You're not. So it's essential that we all know our place, and it's essential for us to know God's place. What happens in the book of Job? Satan's defeated. Job is sanctified and vindicated and restored. We'll see that next time. The three friends were forced to admit that they're very confident but very incompetent. Counsel needed to be corrected. God was vindicated and victorious. So I hope that we don't want to play God or judge God. One writer said Job must realize that he's no more able to exercise jurisdiction in the moral realm than he's able to control the natural realm. And that pretty much summarizes what we've done with today. We have a role to play as in the image of God, but we don't usurp his role or his rule. Satan has been doing that. That's not our God. And deliverance from all evil rests with God, not us. Well, we'll pick it up there, and we'll move on to chapter 42 and next time. And Job has a reply to all this in the first 6 verses of 42, but I'll save that till next time. Thank you, Father, for what we've looked at. All of us are involved in things that we wonder, why am I going through this? What's God trying to do in this? Why doesn't he answer this prayer? Why does he do it the way he's doing it rather than the way I want it? We all have things where God reminds us that he is God and we are not. We have no control over many things in our life. But we can relax because we're not in charge. In Jesus' name, amen.
Lord, as we go from this place, loving you more, trusting you more, may the power of your love and the light of your word shine forth to a sin-darkened world as we go